This will be the one time the microphone picks it up.
They sit down, take a break, and one looks at the phone. These old farts gonna be walking around. Just, sooner or later, one of them's gonna say, 15 seconds. Not minutes later, come old timer. What are you doing? What are you selling? Guy looks at his friend and goes, asshole. The old timer says, business must be good, only 2 left.
We ready?
Ready.
There we go.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The hour is 7 o'clock, and as mayor, I hereby call to order a meeting of the Laconia City Council scheduled for October 9, 2018 at this hour. As always, we'll begin our meeting tonight with a salute to our American flag. I'd ask that you please rise and join Councilor Andrew Hosmer in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We'll note for the record that the minutes to tonight's meeting are being kept by City Clerk Cheryl Hebert, and I would ask that she please call the roll.
Counselor Cheney?
Here.
Counselor Bounds?
Here.
Counselor Lippman?
Present.
Counselor Haynes?
Here.
Counselor Hamel?
Here.
Counselor Hosmer?
Here.
Mayor Engler?
Well, present is in a small minority tonight, so I will be present.
Thank you, Mayor.
I want unanimity on here.
All right, let the record show that all 6 councilors are present tonight, and a quorum has been established for this meeting. We'll also note for the record in the minutes that the council was joined at the front table tonight also by City Manager Scott Myers. First up, we have a fun thing to do, and I'm going to come around to the microphone for this. Proudly, for the 3rd time in 4 years, we have an opportunity tonight, members of council and guests, to welcome and recognize members and coaches from the 2018 NHIA Division III state champion girls lacrosse team. Girls, welcome. I understand that we're up against some stiff competition tonight. The spring sports are tough for us in terms of recognizing the athletes because the tournaments typically don't get over until right in June sometime, and then people scatter right after that and have summer jobs and whatnot. And so we're trying to get it back together in the fall, and we realize I think you have 3 seniors on the team, so we couldn't expect them. They're off to college or jobs or whatever at this point in time. And I also understand from talking to Coach Howe that we're up against a girls' soccer game tonight too, so the girls that are playing soccer are not able to join us. But we are very grateful and very proud that the rest of you were able to join us tonight. So I have a proclamation to read, and then we'll call each of you up one by one, and we have a certificate to give each of you of congratulations as well. As I said before, this is the 3rd time in 4 years that the Sachems have captured that state championship, and so we and the boys, I think, won one of those years as well also. So we really have become Lacrosse Central, the lacrosse capital of New Hampshire, and we're very proud of that and proud of all those of you who have contributed to that. And I think some of you have been here before. So welcome back for those of you who have. And I told Coach Howe a few minutes ago, we're welcome to have you back every year. That sets a pretty high standard for everyone involved, but something that you've proven that you're more than capable of meeting. I was not able, unfortunately, because of a previous commitment, to go to the state championship game this year, which I think we won over Hopkinton. Was it not 10-6? But it was remarkable in terms of your overall season, I think, in terms of the last two teams you played, Derryfield School in the semifinals and Hopkinton in the finals, that both of those teams had beaten you earlier in the year, and you came back and beat both of them back-to-back in the state tournament to win the championship. I was able to go to the semifinal game because thankfully it was here, as you recall, against Derryfield School, which was the ranked number one, seeded number one in the tournament coming into the tournament, and I was able to attend and enjoy that game. And it's been a while ago, but I do remember, if memory serves, that the score was tied 10-10 into the second half with about, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes to go, something like that in the game. And from that point on, the score was Laconia 9, Derryfield 2. So what does that say, obviously, about your effort and being able to perform under pressure, etc.? Final score against the number one ranked team was 19-2. Excuse my voice, in favor of Laconia. So let me read this. Excuse me. Let me get some water. Hopefully that'll do the trick. Yep. So let me read quickly this proclamation, if you will. Whereas the players on the Laconia High School girls lacrosse team have demonstrated excellence by winning the NHIAA Division III state championship, and whereas on June 5th, 2018, in their third finals appearance, all successful, I might add, Laconia defeated Hopkinton by a score of 10-6 to win the Division III state championship. And whereas because of the dedication and commitment of the entire team and coaching staff, another championship banner will now hang proudly in the school gymnasium. And whereas the city recognizes that the future of our community lies in the initiative, enthusiasm, and spirit of our youth. And whereas the Laconia City Council, the families and friends, along with sachems young and old, would like to express our sincere appreciation for the accomplishments of Laconia High School girls lacrosse team and coaching staff have made for themselves, their school, and their community. And we wish to recognize the following players and coaches: Caitlin Brooks, Bella Daly, Rennie Randall, Caitlin Biotti, Emma LeDuc, Megan Ash, Hannah Dow, Sophie George, Emily Avery, Skylar Totkus, Sydney Stevens, Nicole Turpin, Alicia Mingo, Megan Gaspa, Rebecca Howe, Devin Mello, Shay Gunning Lavoy, Eliza Lefebvre, and Lydia Tucker, as well as coaches Bob Howe, Carrie Howe, and Tony Petrozzani. And whereas several Laconia High School girls lacrosse players achieved special recognition, with 3 players being named to the All-State first team and 1 to the All-State second team, 1 player being named by the U.S. Lacrosse Organization as an academic All-American, 2 players being named to the Senior NH Vermont All-Star Game, and because of their academic and athletic achievements, 2 members are now playing lacrosse in college, 1 in Division III and 1 in Division I, members of that team. Now, therefore, I, Edward J. Engler, Mayor of the City of Laconia, do hereby proclaim Tuesday, October 9, 2018, as Laconia High School Girls Lacrosse Team Appreciation Day. Congratulations. Well deserved, well deserved. So, Coach Howe, I see you. Could you come up and join me here? I'm going to give you this. This is Coach Bob Howe, who until this year was the assistant coach.
Correct.
Correct? And Carrie Howe, his wife,
Yeah.
was the coach. And she is now coaching at Plymouth State, I believe,
Yes.
right? And she's also an assistant coach. All right. So, is Tony here?
No.
Tony's not here. All right. So I'm going to give you these three
Okay.
coaches, and I know a lot of the girls aren't here, but you can help me go through this so there was those three. And I don't know what order this is in, but ladies, when your name is called, if your name is called, presumably we have all of you covered here, come up and join us, and if you could gather behind or around here somewhere, we'll have a photo op for people that like to take a picture as well, okay? All right, so I don't know if these are by grade or what they are, but what order they're in, but
Pretty random.
they're pretty random?
Looks random.
Okay, all right, well, you can tell us what grade they're in, right? You know all these things? He's not sure whether he does or not. Okay, first up is Lydia Tucker. Lydia's not here. All right, I'll give you that one, freshman. Eliza Lefebvre. Eliza. There you are, and congratulations. Shay Gunning Lavoy. Freshman. Devin Mello.
Senior.
All right, she's one of our three
Graduating,
seniors. Graduated, okay, and where is Devin this year?
Plymouth State.
She's
She's
one
one
of
of the ones playing college lacrosse.
Oh,
Three.
terrific,
Yep.
terrific. Okay, this is a familiar
I
name
know
to you,
that
I
one,
think.
yep.
This would be Rebecca Howe,
Yep, she's
the coach's
graduated.
daughter, and she's at St. Bonaventure.
Correct.
She was a senior, and she's playing lacrosse at St. Bonaventure, Division One. All right, Megan Gaspa.
She's not present. She's a sophomore.
Sophomore?
Last year. I'm going by last year.
By last year, she was a sophomore, okay. Alicia Mingo. Did I pronounce that right? Close enough. Congratulations. There you are. Thanks for coming tonight. Nicole Turpin,
Played soccer. She was a sophomore.
soccer player. Sydney Stevens,
Another soccer player.
Another
She was a
soccer-
junior.
junior. So how many seniors we got coming back this year then? Or this year?
1, 2, 5.
Five that'll be seniors this year. This is one of them, I think. Skylar Totkus.
She'll be a senior.
She's playing, she'll be soccer. Okay.
She's a
Emily Avery.
graduated senior. Graduated senior.
Oh, good. And where is she this fall?
She's at University of Maine.
Oh, good. Okay. Sophie George. No, Sophie.
No Sophie.
Hannah Dow.
Gold.
There we go. Hannah, congratulations. Thank you for coming tonight. Is this Megan or Megan? How would we
Megan.
pronounce that? Megan? Megan Ash. Oh. Emma LeDuc. So we're down to two. I hope we got one for both of you too, or I'm going to be in big trouble here. I'll be Caitlin Biotti. Yes. I saw your dad here, so I figured you probably had to be here too. Congratulations. Rennie, is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah, Rennie Randall.
Rennie Randall.
Not here. Where's Caitlin Brooks?
I hope, are we missing one? Oh no. I guess you don't get one. Oh, I'm sorry. I have one for Bella
Bella Daly. She's not here.
Deli. So we missed a name? All right, we'll make note of that. Come up, please, and introduce yourself here. I apologize. We'll get that to you.
Caitlin Brooks.
Caitlin,
Yeah.
and we're spelling that.
K-A-I-T-L-Y-N. B-R-O-O-K-S.
K.
S.
Brooks, Caitlin Brooks. All right. I apologize, Caitlin. You get the big one. Give her the big one. There you go. So we'll get that individual one to you also as well. I'm sorry?
I'll take Bella's.
Yeah. Okay, let's, tell you what, Bob and I will come over there and join you two, you girls. This corner here. And then let's get the girls in as close as we can here. Come up. Now, don't hide. Come up closer. Good. There we go. feel shy about coming up. We'll get out of the way in a second here. Take his place. Okay, we all covered?
Board, I didn't even.
All right. Well, again, ladies, thank you and congratulations.
What?
I forgot a very important part here. I don't want to be the only one to have an opportunity to congratulate you. So what I'd like you to do is follow me around the horseshoe here and allow everyone at the front table to congratulate you. So, okay? You want me to go first?
Yeah.
Hey, congratulations. Great job. Probably see you back next year, Hope. Good job.
3 out of 4 is a dynasty. That's right.
Well done.
Good job.
You rock.
How are you?
And you too, you rock.
Congratulations.
Great job.
The Patriots won 3 out of 4 was a dynasty, so.
Yeah. Counselor Lippman was just pointing out that 3 out of 4 constitutes a dynasty by almost any measure, I think, so. We're very proud of them and hope to see them again next year. It's a lot of expectation, but they seem to be up to it. Okay, back to regular business here. Minutes. The minutes before us tonight are from September 24th. Those minutes were distributed by the city clerk on the 27th of September. No corrections have been suggested to date, and so unless there are any at this hour, I'm going to declare the minutes to our meeting of September 24th, 2018 as accepted as presented by the city clerk. Consent and action items. We have one temporary traffic order request. Number 15 is on page 15 of your packet today. This has to do with the annual holiday parade, and it is a request to waive all fees associated with the event. And so this is a normal request, and the holiday parade this year is scheduled for November 25th. The order to be from 2:30 to 5:30 p.m. So a motion would be in order to approve temporary traffic order 2018-15 for the 2018 holiday parade being held November 25, 2018 from 2:30 to 5:30 p.m. and the request to waive all fees associated with the event. Councilor Hamel makes that motion. Is there a second? Councilor Hosmer seconds the motion. Any discussion? All those in favor, please raise a hand. I have 6 votes in the affirmative. That motion carries. Well, I noticed, Mr. City Manager, on the back of this, there's a memorandum here from Tara Shore at the Belknap Mill. Is that covered by this, or is that something separate? I see her in the audience tonight. So
The Belknap Mill is the lead organizer for this, and that was just the background request to go with a temporary traffic order.
Okay. All right, so this is not some other piece of business?
No.
Okay. All right, so we have the order then. Okay, citizens' comments for matters not on the agenda. This is the appropriate time for anyone who's in our audience tonight who wishes to address the council on any matter that is not on tonight's agenda. Accent on not. Representative St. Clair, with his now customary tie, or one of his many customary ties.
I didn't say a word.
I was just looking at yours. Good evening. Some of you may be aware that Jennifer and I had sent a letter to the paper thanking everybody for all the work that was done on the Bike Timberfest block party. And I was horrified to see that somehow the city council was not mentioned in there. Everybody was, but the city council. And I was, as I said, horrified to see that. And, you know, it really was a big deal for you guys to approve that. At least I felt it was, to have the faith in everybody that was doing the work for this. It really meant a lot, and I think it means a lot to the city as a whole that the council is willing to look at things out of the box, so to speak, which you do all the time. But I just want to thank you on behalf of Jennifer and obviously also on behalf of Anthony and everybody else that was involved in this for taking this shot. And I look forward to more things like that, whether it's at Weirs Beach or downtown Laconia or anyway. So, thank you.
Thank you for taking the time to say that. Anyone else wish to address the council on a matter that is not on tonight's agenda? Okay. We had an interview scheduled, but that interview has been postponed to our first meeting of November, so there's no interview tonight. So I think next up is the mayor's report, and I see my friend Carmen Gifford, our friend Carmen Gifford, in the audience tonight, so that gives me pause to remind everyone, as if anybody needs reminding. Councilor Hosmer and I are appropriately attired here with orange ties tonight, that this weekend is Pumpkin Festival, and so we're all very much looking forward to that. And I heard you on the radio today begging for volunteers, so I will amplify that for you, that there's the Chamber of Commerce, which is a sponsoring organization, is still in need of volunteers for the event on Friday and Saturday. So if anyone is so disposed, please contact the Chamber of Commerce office to volunteer your time for those 2 days. An amazing effort by everyone involved to bring this attention, this very positive attention, to our city. And obviously it takes a massive volunteer effort to pull this off, so we're appreciative of Carmen and everyone else involved. The second thing I wanted to mention is that for those of you who have not heard, some very sad news reached us today. And that is the passing of long-term Police Commissioner Armand Mayhew. And I believe that I'm told that the services for Armand will be held next week. I believe there are calling hours at the Bean Center on Tuesday from 6 to 8 p.m. And the funeral will be held at Sacred Heart at 10 a.m. the following morning, Wednesday morning. And I hope all of you, as I, had a chance to get to know Armand in his lifetime and appreciate him. And everything he did for our community as both a police officer. I know Councilor Hamill served with him at one time on the police force, and then later for the many years he served. I don't know exactly how many from memory, but it had to be 15 or more, I think, on the police commission that he served there with great distinction. He was one of a kind, a true gentleman in every sense of the word. Although I'm told from the stories of back when he was on the police force that his lack of physical stature did not prevent him from
starting riots.
But he made enormous contributions to our community, and I, for one, will greatly miss him. Committee reports. Anybody have a committee report tonight? None? How about liaison reports? No liaison reports either. All right, we are quickly to citizens' request to comment on current agenda items. Is there anyone in our audience tonight who would like to address the council on a matter that is on tonight's agenda? And first up is former Mayor Paul Fitzgerald.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Members of the council, Paul Fitzgerald from Westcott Law. I'm here on behalf of the Pendleton Beach Association. You may recall last month I bought a neighborhood. This evening I'm only bringing a delegation, but they're just as formidable. We have corresponded with you. We have contacted, I think, all of you. Thank you, Scott. in one way or another. Some of you have been out to see the roads that we're talking about, which are Pendleton Beach Road and, or Pendleton Road and Boathouse Road. So I'm not going to belabor everything that's gone on in the past year. We're here this evening to hopefully get your endorsement for the draft motion that is in your agenda packet, to answer any questions you might have about the situation. And I only want to make 2 brief points before we get into any questions that you might have if there is any discussion for us. If not, then we'll simply await your action. The first one is sincere thanks from the association. This has been a long process. We first appeared before the council or one of the council committees over a year ago at this point. We've been talking to your administrators. We've been talking to you. It's been a lengthy process. We appreciate all of the effort on behalf of your part and the staff. And that's not just verbiage. I personally know what goes into being a counselor, and the time that you spent on this is greatly appreciated, particularly those of you who took the time to visit with the folks out there, walk the roads, etc. The only other point that I wish to make, although we're certainly open to discussion on anything, is I know that there has been some discussion about the possibility that perhaps Boathouse Road should be treated differently than Pendleton. I would simply point out to you that if you've read the correspondence and other materials that we've submitted, the only distinction between the two is that Pendleton serves the pumping station that's mentioned in my correspondence to you. Boathouse does not. But all of the other issues in terms of emergency access, access for your vehicles, our vehicles, if you will, the tax fairness issue, which I know does not drive an emergency road situation, but is a consideration as well, they remain the same for both of these. Along with the lack of services demanded by this particular neighborhood, the way that the street network evolved, all the same. So we would ask your kind consideration to treat those two as one and the same and to extend the services to Boathouse, particularly when you look at the economic impact, which from my point of view, when one considers the municipal budget, is practically negligible to include Boathouse in this. So with that, unless you have any questions for us, we simply ask you to, when it gets to the time on the agenda this evening, approve the draft motion, and we do appreciate the effort once again. Thank you.
All right. Any questions for Counselor at this point in time?
Yeah.
Counselor Bounds has a question.
I guess that in terms of the approval for Pendleton Road or Pendleton Beach Road, however you want to call it, I don't have much of an issue with respect to that in terms of its history and its qualifications as an emergency lane. But when I look at this, I guess I'm looking at 2 things. I'm looking at 1, past history, and 2, the necessity as an emergency lane. And the past history for the Boathouse Road is significantly different than Pendleton Beach. And so those are my concerns. I've expressed them to other counselors. I'm expressing them now to you. Past history makes a difference to me. Doesn't mean I made up my mind. Doesn't mean I'm convinced one way or the other. But as Boathouse Road has been privately maintained for years, that makes a significant difference to me in terms of how we treat these 2 roads. So if you can address that. I know you said sort of generally that the same concerns in terms of emergency lane access apply to Boathouse Road as applies to Pendleton Beach Road. So maybe if you could just help me a little with respect to those concerns and the need at this date. I mean, it's never been designated an emergency lane before. I don't know of any problems that have arisen in the past, so.
A couple of quick points, David. I don't mean to be flip, but on Boathouse, the fact that it was not treated with municipal services or not provided any municipal services, including winter maintenance, in the past, all by itself isn't a very good reason for not going forward and doing the right thing. These folks, they pay the same taxes as on Pendleton. They need the same services. They need the same access. The fact that perhaps, and it's my understanding that they voluntarily have taken care of their own maintenance and not brought the issue to the city, not pressed it, the fact that they've done that is not a reason that they should be penalized going forward. And when the city's looking at the entire road situation, as to your credit you are, at this point, it seems to me that now is the time to look at Boathouse as well and rectify that situation, particularly, as I pointed out before, given the very small cost. In terms of the emergency lane issue that you raise, it seems to me that, again, with the exception of the access to the pumping station down there off of Pendleton, all the issues remain the same as in my correspondence, meaning primarily access for emergency services, the ability of the city to get its vehicles in and out, meaning the fire vehicles, police vehicles, etc. And I'm told, I didn't have this conversation, but there is someone here from the Pendleton Beach area that apparently did have the conversation. I'm told that former Chief Erickson was of the opinion that Boathouse Road should get this designation because it's used for access to because that's the roadway that's needed for water access for that neighborhood if there's a fire in that area, because there are no dry hydrants or anything of the sort. So I hope that answers your question. Certainly can go into it in more detail if you need to, but I think the comparison stands.
When you say water access, you mean access to the lake?
Yes.
Okay.
They pump out of it.
Yeah, okay. My only comment is that I wouldn't characterize it as penalizing the residents of Boathouse Road, but I respect your comments and thank you for your time.
All right, anyone else have any quick? Councilor Hamel has a quick question.
Paul, on the, sorry about that. On the private part of this, on the Boathouse Road, is supposedly in the deeds that it is private and should remain private. Could you explain something on that? Because in talking to some of the folks, it's kind of like it is, but it isn't. So, I mean, if you could clarify that part of it.
Well, it's my understanding, and obviously I've seen the deed, I've read the deed and so forth. It's my understanding that when the Irwin family deeded the roadways to the association, they put that covenant in there. I can't speak for the Irwin family as to why they did that, what the motivation was, but it is in the deed that the road will remain private. And these folks are kind of stuck with that, if you will. There would be ways that they could change that. It would be an awful lot of effort, an awful lot of expense, and it might not be successful, Bob. But that's really about all that I know about that.
How far back does that go? Do you have any idea roughly?
I'm Warren Hutchins from Boathouse Road, Ward 6, and fortunately we are represented by Ward 1, Bruce Janey as well. That deed transfer occurred in 1993, and it was when Bob Irwin, as trustee for Peter Irwin's trust, was resolving several land transfer issues down there, and they deeded the road over to the association at that time. Up until then, it had no, it was owned by them, and frankly, I have no idea how they got that. But one of the things that I commend the council on, that at one of the council meetings here, you all decided that with all these private roads in town, that you were not going to have everybody try to track down all their deeds or have the city spend city resources through the legal trying to track down the deeds. You determined that either the road was public, which the only way that a road does become public in the city is if you all accept it as that. If not, then it is private.
Is that on the individual deeds, Warren, or is it like a blanket thing?
About the road, Bob, is on the, it's the...
It's a single master deed.
Yeah, it's a single deed from Peter Irwin's estate to the Pendleton Beach Association.
Okay, so it has nothing to do with the individual.
No, we're an absolute traditional Laconia neighborhood. Our first house was built in 1910, And we have a history that one of our neighbors wrote up, and we go back a long, long way. And every single property down there is completely independently owned, just like every other neighborhood in the town. We're not a development. And this whole issue about our roads formally being public or private wasn't resolved until Peter came, Bob actually came to us and said, we'd like to deed over the roads to you. And we said, fine, because we have maintained them in an excellent, what we consider in an excellent manner with our private expense to do that.
Okay.
Okay, we will note that both of you gentlemen are in the audience, and if we need further consultation when we get to this on the agenda, we'll call on you if necessary. Thank you. City Manager's Report, Mr. Myers. Oh, I forgot to ask if there was anyone else. And sure enough, there is.
We're doing it on purpose. I said, thank you. I just wanted to comment on the matter of Lakeside Avenue. Anthony Sandegate is here in the audience, and I don't know if you wanted to ask him any questions now or if you wanted just to wait when you bring that up if you have any questions, which is fine. I just wanted to make sure you knew he was here.
I think if he wishes to make a statement now, now would be the time to do it. If he simply is here to be a resource in case any counselor wants to ask him a question during council discussion, then that's another matter.
Okay, I think, I don't.
But his official opportunity to comment without being asked to by the council is right now.
So I'll make a comment on behalf of myself, if I may. And that is that I've seen the plans for this. It's something that Anthony has talked about for a couple of years now. I know he spent a lot of money and time with an engineering report and a lot of other study. And personally, I think this would be a good thing for for his business and without really impeding at all on the city's right of way up there for that 14 inches that he wants to come out.
Okay.
So, thank you.
We'll note that he's in the audience and take this unofficial opportunity to also thank him and congratulate him for the success of Bike Timber Fest. Is that what it is? It's hard for me to say, but it just goes to show you somebody comes up with an idea and pulls it off, and everyone's grateful afterwards and salutes what a great job was done, and then brought considerable extra business to the city for that weekend we wouldn't ordinarily have had, and have heard almost nothing but exclusively good comments about the event. So thank you, Anthony, and congratulations. Okay, now Mr. Myers.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Included in your agenda packet for this meeting is the financial and operational trends. One item before we get there, before I forget, is I'm notifying you of a city manager appointment. In this case, it's a reappointment to the Laconia Housing Authority. Mark Conda-Dimitraki has agreed to continue to serve on that board. He's been an active participant. He filled a partial remainder of a term when he was appointed a couple of years ago. So I'm notifying you of a full appointment for a 5-year term, which will run through November 1st of 2023. So he's basically got a lifetime commitment with that one there. The financial and operational trends report, I'll start at the top of page 1 for you, page 21 of the agenda. You can see we still continue to lag on the new construction value a bit from where we were 2 years ago and also last year significantly. So we're running just under $9 million year to date through September 30th. And again, that assessing year starts April 1 in conjunction with state law for assessing years. Fire and rescue continues to be busy with over 400 calls for the month of September. We've got some updated information later in the packet on the EMS collection that I will go over with you as well. Turning your attention to page 2 towards the bottom.
Can I stop you there for a half second? Councilor Lippman had a question.
On the net gain in construction value, can you give some perspective on, I can see the dollar value is down, but on the number of building permits, is it that there's less permits being pulled, or is it just the scale of the projects that are?
There seem to be a lot of smaller projects, conversion of basements, additions of a bathroom, or converting a deck into a four-season room, three-season room type of thing. As far as new construction, brand new on the residential, that's kind of tapered down. So a couple of the larger building permit value projects, maybe out on Scenic Drive, we haven't seen as many come in this year so far. I don't know the status on where they are with inventory and those types of things. We are seeing, a couple of developments, come in every second or third month for, 2 or 4 more kind of building permits on a couple of the areas that are continuing the build out. We did see a couple of larger commercial renovations, specifically with the 2 buildings right here at the Main Street entrance to the downtown, the hotel and also the office building across the street, doing some significant value there. Definitely a lot of small permits, people doing improvements on electrical upgrades, on adding generators to properties, but those, while maybe bigger in numbers, aren't necessarily driving any value with that. We wouldn't necessarily go out and say, somebody upgraded an electrical service, so therefore that's adding a lot of significant value to assessment. So it's just kind of plodding along, but we're not seeing a lot on the residential end on new construction as we might have the last year or two. All right, so I'll turn your attention to the second page of the report, toward the bottom, the property tax collection. If you'll notice, that number is extremely strong as the percent collected at 99.61%. And it caught my eye when we looked back over the prior 6 years as to why it was. So I did a little digging into it, but staff knew the answer right away. And I thought it was interesting, so I'm sharing it with you tonight. But if you recall, last year with the changes coming in on the federal tax code, a lot of people, not knowing how the IRS would rule on it or not, went to prepay property taxes by the December 31st deadline last year, not knowing or knowing that potentially their deduction of property taxes on their personal income tax forms might go away this year. So I was informed by the tax collector that we've been sitting on $468,000, in excess of $468,000 that residents or property owners of some sort prepaid on their 2018 taxes by December 31st of last year. Again, we gave no legal advice as to whether or not that was going to be allowed or anything like that. People knew that they put it there, and there was no interest earned on it, but almost $500,000 was prepaid towards that obligation that we're sitting on. So as soon as we kind of churn through that money when the bills go out in November of this year and we get the collection in December, that'll kind of cycle through and we'll recognize that money. We're sitting on the money, but we haven't booked it yet, if that makes sense to you. So that's why that number is higher for that reason. But we still think that property tax revenue has been coming in strong, and that's a sign of a stronger economy than we've had in past years. Same thing with motor vehicle registration at the bottom of the page. Even though we've increased our budget estimates for fiscal year 19 by $200,000, you can see that we're running 0.2 of a percentage point ahead of last year's pace, which was that $200,000 lower figure. So we're trending very strongly on that. The last item that I want to focus a little bit of attention on is on the very last page. It's the EMS billing report. You remember in your packet for September meeting, the first September meeting, it was still a work in progress. We were learning some of the reports that were available. We've been able to query this and age it by month. So what you're looking at in that report is focus on the July billables right now. There were 300 trips. What that gross charge number means that if we were able to bill out 100% of what our rates were and expect full collection, we would have billed out $245,000 and some change. Because we have to follow some of the payment rates through particularly Medicare and Medicaid, that drastically cuts into the amount of net billing that we do. So you can see for July, the gross billables would have been $245,000. The net billables were $127,000. So a very significant reduction through those two federal programs. So we billed 52% of what the actual charges would have been for July. A little bit of write-offs, and I can talk about that if you'd like me to. The payments collected, again, that's for July trips, so we're aging it and we're tracking by July. So we've collected $57,000 so far, so 45% of the July net billables we've collected, and we've got an outstanding balance of $68,000 at this point. A large share of what got paid relatively quickly were the Medicare billables. So just in tracking by categories, the Medicare for New Hampshire residents turns around and gets the payments in relatively quickly. Over 60% is the trend for our history of what we bill is either through Medicare or Medicaid. And knowing that we bill out what they're going to accept and pay on, we really have the expectation that we should be collecting somewhere near close to 100% of what we billed in those particular examples. So to break it down into how much we actually need to receive on an average month in order to hit our revenue projections, which are a little over $1 million for ambulance revenue in the special revenue account, we need to actually collect $85,000 every month for the 12 months, and that would keep us on track. So we'll continue to track it this way. The July will be in its own line item and siloed. We'll track August. So just for comparison, August was 10 trips more, but the net billables was within a couple $100, $127,000. And we've collected 31% of the August billables. And I'll also remind you, the billing agency is billing out typically on a weekly basis. So some of the trips occur in the first of the month, some of the trips aren't occurring to the 31st of the month. So even within 1 month, you might have a 25-day lag time as to when some first bills go out to when some of the late of the month bills go out. So we're going to continue to track that. Our expectation, would be that we should have the lion's share of the money within 120 days, so that July billable, if we said, went through the end of July, we're looking at collections for August, September, October, November. So by the end of November, I think that gives us a pretty good idea of what our trend is going to be, at least for that month, and then we can base future projections on that as how we do that. We'll also be working with a collection company of going after delinquent accounts because they will, they're only collecting a percentage of transactions if they're successful in collecting it. So there's certainly some reason for them to be out there going after accounts that are not paid up in a timely manner. Our collection charge is 5.5%. We can certainly do the calculation here. It's carried in on, so when you look at your budget book, the revenues are carried up here, and that's actually carried as an expense. So we carried a 5.5% collection expense based on our anticipated revenue for the billables. So it does show up in the budget book. So I haven't netted it out here to give you a net because we had it as revenue and expense in the budget book. But the simple math is 5.5% of whatever is collected is what the billing agency is able to do. So that's our trend to date. We'll continue to monitor it, and if there's ways we can update this information for you, we're open to do that.
Councilor Hosmer has a question.
Thank you. Scott, have we had discussions with the billing company here as to, and I know it's a really small snapshot, but in looking at the percentages of percentage billable as well as the percentage of what we've collected so far, is this consistent with what they would anticipate or perhaps shared with us, or inconsistent, or are we even having those discussions?
It's fairly consistent, and we've piggybacked and leaned on the town of Derry a bit, because Derry's been using this collection agency, and some of our staff had gone down there and worked with them, and we're figuring out what reports work for us for our needs. But Derry's been very helpful with the trend, and nothing here seems out of line at this point with the amount of time that it takes for some of the insurance companies to pay on these claims. So I would say if we were 2 months from now and we were still in a 60 or 70% successful collection of the net charges, I'd say that I'd have a different answer for you at that point. But right now, this does not raise a red flag based on the collection successful amount.
Thank you.
This, I'm curious about these 300 numbers. So if I'm reading this correctly, is this saying that in general, the fire department transports someone in an ambulance 10 times a day?
Yes.
So that doesn't mean, that means literally there is someone in the ambulance as a passenger or as a patient.
As a patient.
10 times a day.
Correct. If we go out to the scene of an accident and don't do any transport, that's not in these numbers. That's not a billable. If we go in to someone's house and someone's unsure of whether they want to go to the hospital, and we just do some basic, blood pressure and simple things like that without doing anything more advanced medically, there's no charge for that. And if the ambulance turns around and comes back to the station, that's not counted. So these are actual billable transports.
All right, so do we have any idea, or can we find out or start tracking how many of those are transports from one care facility to another care facility as opposed to home or accident site to hospital?
I'd say the majority of these are from a business or a residence to the hospital. We are available to do a transport from Lakes to another facility, but there are also several other ambulance companies in the region who that's their niche. There may be an occasion where there's not an ambulance available to do that, and it might be a critical need where we may be called, in which case we would be billing,
So 10 times a day, we're taking someone from their home or whatever to LRGH or some other hospital?
Yes.
Okay.
So, just clarify for me, so of the payments reflected, let's do it for July, the 57,134, that would not reflect an actual 5.5% that was paid to the EMS billing folks. So we would subtract that from actual money that we received, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Just, if we could add a couple things to the report over time, just the budgeted number of trips that we're expecting, because then people can kind of gauge it, and then you gave us the target collection number per month that we ultimately want to get to, and it typically takes 120 days to get to a high percentage of what you're going to collect, and so we're not quite there on a lot of these months yet.
Right. So I think the number of trips we're at, so I didn't want to inundate you with report after report, but I think what we're showing is the average net billable per trip is running somewhere around $420. So when we look at collectively what was there, in our payer mix, which could be private, could be workers' comp, could be no insurance, self-pay, could be Medicaid, Medicare, the net trip that we bill for is about $420. And the Medicaid, I think, is in the area of what they allow for the rates that they'll pay on. I think it's around $180. Don't hold me to that exact number, but I think I'm pretty close in off the top of my head with that range that, that's what Medicaid is paying for that transport, $180, whereas a private insurance or someone with no insurance who's being billed directly.
What about Medicare?
Medicare is paying significantly higher than that. I can get you a better number, but I just want to start throwing numbers, but the Medicaid stuck out at me. And
Probably
I
closer to the average.
Yeah, I could look at this and say, why are we only billing, the gross charge would have been $1,000 for an advanced life support and ALS transport, and you scan over into the actual net bill for that trip, and it's less than $200, and you just kind of go, and some of the names for the various Medicaid programs, it's not as neat and clear as just always saying Medicaid. There might be different, names for it as well, different insurance companies involved with it. So it's not my wheelhouse, but in working with staff at the fire department, I'm getting a little more dangerous on some of those things. But they'll be happy when I'm fully dangerous and I stop calling them up all the time.
Henry had
So we'll go to you and then we'll come back.
Okay, thanks. Henry, you might actually be able to Councilor Lippman, help on this, but as of January 1st, from my understanding is managed care comes into effect in the state, which I know there are some concerns about Medicaid reimbursement rates. Is that something that, when it comes to transport and an ambulance, that we should be concerned about as well? And I'd hate to see what we're being reimbursed go down. And I think there's some concern out there about rates maybe not going up, and I know there's been some concern about rates going down in some areas.
I don't have an answer for you on that, but I will get it for you.
Councilor Lippman?
Just in terms of the number of trips compared to the prior year, just I think what we're just trying to do is get a sense of where we stand versus where we were, and so just, I think some metrics we can work offline, maybe on adding a few things here, but I think it's helpful to get this information and just, I think, a few things to help us benchmark where we are versus where we were before.
And I think we have to go back to the hospital to get some of that data, because the hospital was handling the billing at that point, but we can reach out and certainly see if we can get some.
I think the chief had some reports and kind of pull from that.
Councilor Hamel.
Scott, I don't know if it was a year or so ago that we agreed to raise the ambulance rates while the hospital still had it. Do you remember what that was?
I remember we did. There was a mileage reimbursement, and there was an ALS or basic life support, BLS type of increase. But remember, that was only going to apply for entities that the hospital already did not have a contract with. So basically, the Medicare and the Medicaid, those we could bill more, but we were locked into the reimbursement rates that they set.
Those are more for private insurance companies.
It was for private, but I also believe the hospital had some predetermined rates with maybe some of the private insurance carriers, or the bigger ones in the state might be Anthem or might be Harvard Pilgrim or Aetna, or maybe they had negotiated a rate that they would bill for that transport. We as the city don't have those contracts with those private carriers, so we would be able to bill. Doesn't mean that, they're going to pay it all for their covered patients. In some cases, they may pay a certain percent of it, in which case then the remainder of the bill goes to the patient. So we work through that. So sometimes, the hospital may, the insurance company may pay a certain amount, within 60 days or 90 days, but there's still a balance that is being charged to the patient. So then by the time the patient gets the bill from, the insurance company, now you might be looking at another 30 or 45 days for the remainder to be collected. So that's why we think that 120 days is a reasonable
Okay,
benchmark.
so if we're billing these same companies that the hospital had the arrangements with, do we know that they're not using those same arrangements, the private companies, towards the city, or?
We're not. We have no contracts with any of those private insurance companies. But again, probably close to 2/3 of our billables are through the federal programs where it doesn't make place. It doesn't change. So I mean,
if the rate is $1,200, that I can't remember what it was, but it seems like it was 1,000 or 1,200.
the average trip for
like
that with mileage was around $1,000, $1,200. Yeah.
So if we bill that and the insurance company says we'll pay you $800, then down the road we'll bill the patient for $400.
Right. And we're not necessarily agreeing to only accept $800 from an insurance company, but within their plan documents, they may say, we're going to have a $150 deductible, first of all, and then we're going to pay 80%. So maybe they do the math on their formula, and on that $1,200 bill, they may pay $800 or $850 to us. The remainder then goes back to the patient to turn around and pay the patient's copay or deductible or whatever it might be with it. So that's why sometimes, the patient's not going to turn around or even know what they owe until the insurance company pays what they feel their portion is, and then the remainder goes to it. So that's why, again, 120 days is not an unreasonable amount of time when you're looking at that cycle.
Does if we transport to Concord, does the Medicare pay more for that, or are they just the same flat rate, no matter where?
I'll have to ask that question. I don't know that. I mean, generally speaking, we should be getting more because it's a longer transport and the mileage to it and stuff, but I can get you specifics on that.
Well, I'm just curious if, if it stays $100 and something.
I don't believe that. I don't believe that to be the case, but
okay.
Again, I'm learning as we go along with this as well.
I understand. Okay, thank you, Scott.
Okay.
Anything else you're going to cover?
I am not.
Okay, general questions or comments for the city manager? Anyone?
I do.
Councilor Hamel.
Since there's nothing in here about roads, but I'd like to ask the question of probably Wes would know, is when are we looking to button up Court Street? I mean, because November 1st is coming pretty quick.
Well, we're going to work into November. I mean, November 1st is still plenty of time left in the construction season, depending on the weather, on the forecast, and the asphalt plants and stuff. I mean, we've had the plants open until closer to Thanksgiving. Ideally, we'd like to be, you know, wrapping up sooner than that, but we're working to make sure that that's buttoned up this season with a base course on it, and we'll be back in the spring to do the final wearing course on it. But that street will be buttoned up and look as, you know, though it's a brand-new road with everything fit to go through the winter season this year.
Where are we on, it's like 4 or 5 telephone poles in the middle of the sidewalk? What's the status on that? I mean, have we got the easements from the people, or? Because there's no way you're gonna plow around those.
We have worked, we've got a couple of properties that we've worked with easements on. We think we're in a good place with everybody, with the exception of maybe one right now. The new poles are placed where they're required to be placed in order for us to go in and do the road paving and then also construct the sidewalk. So where you see the poles is where they are. We are working on some easements to, you know, get little areas around that. It's very tight in there with a lot of the infrastructure in the ground and where pole placement can go and you know, how far apart the poles can be for Eversource's needs as well. But, you know, we're not, I'm not gonna say we're not gonna be held up with the old poles, because you can see they're cut off and bracketed to the new poles. We are still, I believe, anxiously waiting, Consolidated, to be getting their infrastructure out of the ground and up to the poles to keep that service going. The wires, the poles may be in their locations, but there's still some work on Consolidated, the old Fairpoint, the new Fairpoint name, to get some of their infrastructure in the ground up to the poles so that we can go in and start digging up the roads, which is expected to happen, I believe, at the end of next week. 2 weeks from now. So that clock is ticking on that one. Everything else seems to be okay as far as the utility companies are concerned.
And also, are we still planning on starting from Elm Street to Stock Street this year?
Yes.
Why are we doing that? I mean, we got Court Street opened up. It's not going to be finished till the end of November. You got Merrimack Street. You got Dew Tile project that has to be done while the water's being drained, the lake's being drained. To me, you're going to open up another mess that we're not going to be able to finish or even become close to finishing.
It may not be finished completely to start, but whatever we start will be buttoned up, and there'll be no impact to drivers through the whole winter season.
So we've got everything with that whole project ready to go.
We're working on, I believe, one final item with the engineer on where we're discharging stormwater down in the area of Irwin and the water department, and the concern about, because we're adding a whole lot more storm drains in there to do that project properly. So we're doing the final design on where we're going to put that stormwater so that it doesn't impact the water quality for our drinking supply. So that's the last thing, but beyond there, I think we are ready to go. We're not going to finish that whole project this season, but again, like I said, that'll be buttoned up and in 100% passable condition with asphalt on it for this winter season.
It's just that, you know, I have some concerns that we're going to rush through some of this stuff. And, I mean, just because we have the money that we've borrowed, I don't see a need to rush these projects. I mean, we could start that in the spring, concentrate on what we have open and get that done. You know, it's just, this is my opinion, that's all.
And I hear what you're saying, but we have other projects lined up for the spring, and if we're dealing with the same construction crew and we've got time this fall, we want to take advantage of that, because if we push this project back, then we're pushing back the next part of Court Street, we're pushing back this part of Main Street out here from, Union Ave, I mean, from Main Street. There's a whole ripple effect, and we've got some significant projects that need to go underway. So we've got a clerk of the works on Court Street the entire time who is, you know, inspecting and being there all the time. We're doing, you know, all the testing, all the compaction, we're doing the verifying. We'll be doing the same thing on the Union Ave at Elm Street project.
Are we doing anything when they pave? Are we watching that at all on the paving?
We've got a
portion of it?
full-time staff person who is there overseeing the Court Street project, yes.
Paving.
The entire project, everything from what's going in the ground to the compaction.
What about Pleasant Street? Are we doing anything, watching that at all?
We are watching that as well. We actually were hoping to do some paving on yesterday. The school was out, and it would have been a nice day to do it, but the weather did not cooperate. So yesterday afternoon, they actually did a little bit of the tie-ins from some of the driveways, you know, over the sidewalk into, you know, that area. And at this point, again, because it's time to keep these projects going, and please let me finish my full answer here before we say anything, we look like we're going to be paving on Saturday. And my first reaction was, that's Pumpkin Fest. We've worked out a street route for the trucks to come in to not be impacting anywhere from the downtown. And all they're really going to be doing is, crossing North Main Street at Oak Street and coming over and going right into the project and doing that. But we think having that done, the weather looks good. Typically, there's no traffic coming up. I mean, we've got the sign down right now, so folks have come up on Pleasant Street from North Main on the area that usually we have the sign up saying, do not enter here. We've certainly done that during this construction project for the convenience of people who live at that end without having to come through and navigate the whole project. But we feel comfortable with the determined truck route. There'll be zero impact to the downtown, and realistically, we think we're going to be out of there by 1 o'clock or 1:30 for that whole project and get it done on a day that school's not in session.
Okay.
Anyone else? Okay, we're going to move on to new business. First item of new business is on page 26 of your packet, and that is a request for temporary traffic order numbered 16 having to do with the Pumpkin Festival. And again, I note that Carmen Gifford is in our audience if we have questions about this. Do you have a presentation to make, or are you expecting her to, or?
I think she's here if needed for questions. I would say that the traffic order has been modified a little bit from last year, just generally speaking. It's less restrictive than it was last year, and if you look at the very last bullet point on the second page, we have spoken to all businesses on their Friday night impact and have accommodated, and we've also accommodated and worked with a congregational church in particular for church services on Sunday morning. So those being two things at the beginning of the festival and toward the end were a couple of issues that were raised last year, but again, this year, with the layout change, particularly on Beacon West, the only thing that's really happening on Beacon West is the car show that's happening on Saturday afternoon, and none of that's being set up the day before, and all those vehicles are going to be out of there, by 6 o'clock when the car show is over, and there's no other vendors, there's no tents in that street, and there's no electrical conduit, so that's going to be a really easy opening up, and because of the lack of, I won't say permanent infrastructure, but the lack of more involved infrastructure. So I think we're in a good spot, but Carmen can certainly answer any specific questions that you may have.
Why don't you join us, Carmen, in case somebody does have a question. Councilor Lippman's going to start.
I was just going to make a motion to approve the temporary traffic order for 2018 Pumpkin Festival request and get us going.
Second.
All right, so let me go back to the motion here, and then we can ask questions or have discussion at that point. So Councilor Lippman moves to approve temporary traffic order 2018-16 for the 2018 Pumpkin Festival beginning October 12th, 2018 at 2 a.m. and ending October 14th, 2018 at noon. Councilor Hosmer, were you seconding that?
Sure, yes.
Councilor Hosmer is seconding that. All right. So now we're to discussion. So now if anybody has any questions that need answering, they would be appropriate. Can you just briefly tell us what the changes are?
Well, I think logistically, like Scott said, we tried to make sure that we weren't putting any large structures in any of the streets, so it would allow us to open the streets quicker. And by moving the beer garden into one of the municipal parking lots instead of in the middle of the road, that has definitely helped us to the point that I think if we can, we're going to try and keep Beacon West open Friday evening, which will allow the traffic from the industrial park that gets out even up to second shift to actually come down and go over New Salem Street, over the tracks and back out. So we've tried to really make things a little bit easier. On top of that, we have more coming into the festival, so we've really brought it down into Hanover Street, Canal Street, Main Street, the lots, Mill Street as the walkover, Pleasant Street, and Veteran Square.
Okay, any further discussion, questions? All right, we'll vote then. All those in favor, please raise a hand. 6 votes in the affirmative, motion carries. Thank you.
Thanks for all your hard work.
You're welcome. Don't forget to carve a pumpkin. Thank you.
Okay, next up is a request from Sandagate Properties LLC for City Council to approve an easement for construction of a deck over city property. Who's going to walk us through that? What's being requested?
I will start you on that, Mr. Mayor. So basically, this is a request for Tower Hill Tavern to construct a deck basically over the roof line that is currently, for the most part, exists off their building. A large portion of that sidewalk is privately owned, so those picnic tables and that type of stuff that are along the building, those are on private property. If you look at the map on the second page and use your very fine magnifying glass, we're talking about a 14-inch area that this deck is going to overhang onto the municipal sidewalk over the property line. So if you're looking at that plan on the top left corner, the dotted hashtag line coming out towards Lakeside Ave is where the property line is. The deck goes back towards the building, and just that little bit of the overhang is what we're talking about here. It's literally 14 inches. This was a survey that was done for Anthony and his entity in dealing with Public Works. There's no issue regarding our ability to maintain. The deck is coming off the second floor, so any of our access to the street or the sidewalk underneath it, there is no impact. Going forward, if this is approved here tonight, it still would need Planning Department administrative approval and building permit approval, and I think that would be the appropriate time where conditions could be put in regarding things like, only plastic containers shall be used on the deck and not glass, or items like, the sound ordinance the city currently has for bands or loudspeakers, is still in place. So just because you've got a deck doesn't mean windows and doors are open and band noise is coming out. So those types of conditions would be worked through administratively with the planning department and in conjunction with a building permit. So the request would be, if the council chose, is to approve the easement and authorize me to work with the property owner and our legal counsel to have that drafted and put signatures on appropriate documents.
Questions or comments at this point? Councilor Hamel.
According to the plans, what I see is it might be like 14 inches that's going to go out over the city portion of the sidewalk, but that's going out 6.5 feet.
Sure, and the rest of it's over private property, so, and it's allowed in the zone, so if,
So there'll be, how many of these pillars are going to be going up along that building?
I think we would look to speak to the applicant who's...
Is that be drilling into the sidewalk we just put there, correct?
No, I think it's being, I'm not an engineer, cantilevered, is that the word I'm looking for? Cantilevered, so,
Looks like 5 pillars, maybe?
yeah, so
One every 16 feet, but I might add a couple just to make it look aesthetically correct.
You're putting pillars from the
Yeah,
thing
pillars.
down through the sidewalk.
Sidewalk with footings.
How many?
Yeah, one every 16 feet, maybe 5 or 6.
Has this, I'm addressing this to you, has this been reviewed from a safety standpoint?
the design engineer work you're talking about?
Well, no, what I'm talking about is my only concern would be that you've got support poles that are, if I'm understanding this correctly, that would be, well, how far would the support poles be from the street?
It ranges from about 14 feet down to about 9 feet, 8 feet. So it's on a small hill. They would be coming
From
down.
the street?
Well, to the sidewalk.
From the curb, how far from the curb into the pole?
The, one whole sidewalk block, so probably about 8 feet.
So there would still be 8 feet
Oh,
of
yeah.
sidewalk that would not be covered by
Right.
the, okay, all right, I misunderstood then. I thought it was a lot closer to the street.
No, it's a big, good-sized sidewalk out there, for sure.
Doesn't sound right.
A big never mind to what I was
That's all right.
thinking.
And what's the height above the sidewalk?
Height-wise, well, it's on a bit of a hill, so it
understand,
goes
that's why I'm
from,
asking.
it goes from probably about 15 feet down to about 8 feet, as far as the poles would go. The longest one will be on the corner of Tower and Lakeside Ave.
Any other questions?
Yeah, Wes, what's the width of that whole sidewalk, do you know?
Not off the top of my head, sir, but I know in the widest part, it's probably around 15 feet. Down there by the tower intersection, just before you hit the bump out, because it comes back from the parking area all the way back to the front of the Tower Hill Tavern. And they've got at least, I want to say, 2 or 3 picnic benches that come out against the building perpendicular, and they don't interfere with the travel way for the sidewalk.
Counselor Lippman.
When are you contemplating doing the construction?
I'm gonna do the demolition now, and then do the construction in the spring. Be done before May 1st.
I guess what you probably sensing of concern is just, I think, you know, the engineering or the cuts that we have here in the picture. I'd like to get a better sense of what's really going to look like.
Yeah.
And I'm not against you doing what you're doing. I just want to get a better sense of how it's really going to fit in.
Yep.
I don't know if you could bring something back that would be.
For sure.
Do you have a rendering or something?
I don't have a rendering, but I can have one done.
I think that would help just to make sure that our concerns for the
Yeah, for sure.
city are dealt with.
So whose purview would aesthetics come under?
I mean, the council could add something, or they could leave it up to staff to make that conditions of, you know, of acceptable, you know, final renderings and material list and that type of stuff. Planning staff could.
Would it be the planning board or who?
No, this would
Staff review.
not be required to go to the planning board.
Counselor Lippman.
I think we're just more concerned about, I mean, the aesthetics are one thing. I think you want it to look good for your
Gotta look-
business.
gotta look
But
great.
I think the issue is just around preserving the value of the construction that we've done already, making sure that that's not compromised, and having a better sense of how people who are going to go buy it are going to be able to navigate it. I think
Right.
those are the two concerns I'm hearing.
Why would this not have to go to the planning board?
It's an allowed use in the zone, and it's not a new site plan, it's just someone adding a deck onto an existing building.
There's
You need
no
a bit-
setback issues? Well, what's the will of the council? We have a proposed motion in front of us.
I'd make a motion to table it until he could come back with a rendering of what the project's gonna look like.
Well, let's get the motion on the floor then, and then first, okay? So will you make the motion? Counselor Hamel moves to approve the request from Sandgate Properties Limited Liability Corporation for City Council to approval of an easement for construction of a deck over city property located at 264 Lakeside Avenue in Laconia, as shown on the plan entitled Deck Framing for Tower Hill Tavern, 264 Lakeside Avenue, Laconia, New Hampshire, prepared for Sandgate Properties LLC dated August 2, 2018, and prepared by Falwell Engineering Services LLC, and to authorize the city manager to sign all necessary easements and agreement documents.
Point of order, Mr.
Is there
Mayor?
a second for that?
No, I'd like to raise a point of order. I think there's been a motion to table. I don't know why we need the motion to.
Nothing on the floor to table.
Yeah,
I'm trying to get it on the floor so we can table it.
Don't be a lawyer.
I'm, all right, I'm not gonna argue with you. I don't think that's right, but that's okay. That's okay.
All right. Would you like to second it?
Yeah, but if we vote for the motion like you're describing it, we're approving it.
No. All you're doing is getting the motion made and seconded. Then a motion to table would be in order.
Procedurally, under your concept, I will move to second the motion.
Thank you. All right, now the motion has been made and seconded. Now a motion would be in order to table the motion.
I'll make that motion.
And that motion is made by Counselor Lippman, table it to
You get it
pending,
pending delivery of the rendering and safety concerns being addressed and the construction concerns.
is there a second to that? Counselor Hamel seconds the motion to table with those conditions. Does the applicant understand what's being asked for?
Understood.
All right. All those in favor of tabling, please raise a hand. 6 votes in the affirmative, motion is tabled. Thank you. Okay, next up is Pendleton Beach Road and Boathouse Road. A request to designate them as emergency lanes with a limited scope of maintenance. So are we looking to the city manager, or are we looking to Public Works?
I think we probably would start with Counselor Hosmer as the one who asked this to be placed on the agenda and has been
Sorry.
involved with this.
Should we move to, I may make a motion to move this amendment and then go to discussion after that?
I'll
Okay.
second that.
All right. A motion has been made by Counselor Hosmer to move to approve the request to designate Pendleton Beach Road and Boathouse Road as emergency lanes with a limited scope to only include winter maintenance, and that the Department of Public Works develop for City Council review and approval maintenance standards for emergency lanes that receive only winter maintenance. Seconded by Counselor Cheney, was it? I heard a voice.
Yes, it was me.
All right. So we are to discussion. Counselor Bounds.
I would rather treat these as two separate motions, because I think Pendleton Beach Road, as far as I'm concerned, is a pretty easy answer that it qualifies. Not only do the history of it qualify, and the emergency lane qualifications are there. I'm not so sure about Boathouse Road as emergency lanes, so I would ask to consider them separately for a discussion on each.
So I think parliamentary, the thing for you to do would be to make a motion to amend the motion to strike Boathouse Road.
I'll make that motion.
Everybody understand what we're doing here? Counselor Bounds is making a motion to take the words Boathouse Road out of the motion. So we would be dealing, if that passes, we would be dealing only at this point with Pendleton Beach Road. Then a separate motion could be made theoretically now or later
For Boathouse.
Road, is what he's suggesting. So the question is, the motion has been made to strike the words Boathouse Road from Counselor Hosmer's motion. Is there a second for that?
I'll second it for discussion.
All right, Counselor Hamel seconds that motion. Discussion. So now we're talking about separating the two in effect.
Well, Mr. Mayor, I'm going to oppose the motion because I think it's a distinction without difference with in these two streets, both Pendleton and Boathouse. I think that regardless of what the residents of Boathouse have done over the past couple of decades in plowing that road at their own expense, I don't see that road, Boathouse Road, being distinctly different than Pendleton Beach Road. I think each of those roads could and should qualify as emergency lanes based on the fact that the city has an obligation, if there's an emergency at one of those residences, whether it's our ambulance that needs to get there, our firefighters and the fire engines, or our police officers, we're going to have an obligation to get to those residences and those people, and the roads should be cleared of snow or sanded from inclement weather so they can provide these services. I just don't see the difference as being so distinctive, but for the fact that there's a pumping station on Pendleton Beach Road that would make it maybe slightly different. But if we have an obligation to the residences on Pendleton, then we would have we'd have the same obligation to the residences and the citizens of people on Boathouse Road. So I don't oppose this motion to divide the question, if you will, based on those facts.
Well,
Counselor Bounds.
Yeah, my rationale is simple. The history of the use of Boathouse Road is very different from the history of the use of Pendleton Beach Road. I understand that you support both. I don't know the rationale that you would use to keep both in consideration, I don't think is appropriate for this discussion. You can make that same argument with respect to Boathouse Road that you can make with Pendleton Beach Road. And you would consider it as strong for one as strong for both. I want to have some questions. I have some questions about it. I want to hear what other council members say about this. I think that Pendleton Beach Road is a straightforward question and an easy answer. I don't think that Boathouse Road is such a straightforward answer. And the reason I'm asking that we separate them out is so that we can have the discussion about Boathouse Road, because I'd hate to be in a position where I was voting against a motion simply because it included Boathouse Road and not in terms of the consideration. So that's my basic rationale. I understand what you're saying, Councilor Hosmer, but the rationale I don't think applies to this. You can make the same argument with respect to Boathouse Road when we bring that up for consideration that you're making now, but I don't think it applies equally to both. So,
Well, Councilor, I'm hopefully optimistic that you're going to come along on both of these avenues and support the emergency lane. So perhaps it's just trying to be more expeditious in getting this whole argument in front of the council so we can come to a unanimous decision, I hope. But, you know, I also, one of my concerns is that the difference you're talking about is that the residents of Boathouse Road voluntarily and at their own expense plowed that road. So it's almost as if we're using their own good deeds to perhaps exclude them from the overall emergency lane.
I understand that argument. I understand, and I think I commented on Attorney Fitzgerald's comment about penalizing them. I don't look at it the same way. I just view them as two different questions, and I personally, council may disagree with me, I personally don't want to vote on a motion on the whole without having the discussion about Boathouse Road separately. So that's why I'm asking for separate consideration.
Okay, so I'll withdraw my tentative opposition to that, Mr. Mayor, just so we can certainly indulge you in the discussion.
Indulge, that's a good word, I like that. Councilor Lippman, and then we'll go to Councilor Cheney.
So I guess my perspective on it is I'm not looking at the past, I'm looking forward at the safety issue. I think that was raised with respect to being water access being an important part of fire suppression there. So I don't really take into account what's been done or not done. I take into account what we have a public safety requirement there, and also potentially with respect to the Winnipesaukee interceptor that there could be advantage for us to do that. I guess my sense of the sentiment is that the votes are there to just deal with this expeditiously as one motion.
Okay.
Councilor Cheney.
It's even easier for me, although I agree with everything that Councilor Lippman said. It's a matter of basic fairness, and I'm going to support both, and I will not support the motion that's on the table at the moment.
Let me ask Councilor Hosmer a question, since your motion, and I don't intend, my intent is not to be confrontational on this at all, and I would say that you know, if I had a vote on this, I would vote to approve both. So I'm just trying to think through the broader questions here that we face, not only on this but on other roads as well. And that question is, in your eloquent defense of or rationale for why we should do this in terms of the residents, the property owners that are paying taxes, and the need for fire trucks and police and all that. So taking that statement at face value, what road in Laconia would that not apply to?
I don't know, and I'm not prepared to answer that because I haven't looked at it, at all the roads in Laconia. I'm not quite sure that it
seemed to me
wouldn't.
my first reaction was that would apply to every single road in the city.
Well, it could, because it may very well, if we have an obligation to serve and protect residences, businesses, and the citizens of the city, it may darn well. I mean, I think maybe that's where we're heading to some extent here. I'm not willing to go there yet, but that might be where we're heading.
Okay. Councilor Levin?
I get what you're saying, Mayor. I think that's why, I think the distinction as to why this is appropriate to make an emergency lane is on a very narrow basis, based on the circumstances of that, because there may be instances where, based on the criteria that you have mentioned, Councilor Hosmer, that once we go down that road, there's nothing we can not do, and there may be reasons why we might not. I think my general disposition is to try to go in favor of the property owner, and particularly where it's been historically done. But I think, in terms of this situation, I think there's a narrower way we can approve it, and it doesn't compromise adjudicating others in the future.
Well,
Any further discussion?
that's my
Councilor
concern, is just in terms of the precedents we set. I don't think I'm upsetting the apple cart here by asking for separate considerations of each motion, but I'll let the council figure that out for themselves. I just don't want to be put in a position of voting no, because I have reservations about Boathouse Road, and we haven't fully discussed it, and voting, and when I want to vote yes, and quite frankly, I want to vote yes for Boathouse Road, but I'm still not there. So there you go.
Let me ask the city manager one procedural question here. If Councilor Bound's motion passes and Boathouse Road is struck from the motion that's on the floor, if a councilor wants to, can they move to make a separate motion for Boathouse Road tonight, or would that have to wait for a future meeting and be posted separately?
No, I think you can do that tonight because you've advertised both streets as being considered for this partial emergency lane designation. So I think if you split the question, divide the question, I think the next motion can be to move Boathouse as well.
Okay, thank you. All right, so the motion on the floor is the original motion made by Councilor Hosmer. Councilor Bounds has made a motion to strike the words Boathouse Road from that motion. That amendment has been seconded. So the amendment's what we're voting on now. The amendment proposed by Councilor Bounds to strike Boathouse Road from this motion. We ready to vote? All right, all those in favor of Councilor Bounds' motion to strike, please raise a hand. All those opposed, please raise a hand. All right, we have 1 vote yes, 5 votes no, the motion fails. So we're back to a discussion on the main motion, which was Councilor Hosmer's motion. Councilor Littman.
And I think for the reasons that Councilor Bounds raised up, separating them, I think we should vote to approve the motion as read, but be very specific in our reason for approving boathouses based on the limited scope of safety with respect to the special circumstances that road, so that we're not prejudicing every other one that comes before us.
So you would like to amend this motion to include more language?
I don't know that we need more language. I just think the minutes need to reflect the fact that if we do vote to approve this, that we're voting to approve it on the narrow basis of the unique circumstances of where that road lies with respect to water access and with respect to the Winnipesaukee system, the interceptor, river basin interceptor.
Do we have a consensus as far as the minutes are concerned for Councilor Littman's rationale?
Yeah. Yes.
Yes? Yes. All right, so if the minutes would reflect that, please. All right, so we're back to the main motion again. Any further discussion? Councilor Hamel.
I mean, since both of these are on the table now, Dave.
Yeah.
I'd really like to hear your...
Okay. To me, history matters. It's not like we should just move forward and do this because Boathouse Road has never been treated like this before. And the rationale for safety has never raised a concern in the past. There's never been an issue before the council with respect to the treatment of Boathouse Road. So history matters. I'm not foreclosing that even though history matters in these circumstances, that making Boathouse Road an emergency lane is the appropriate thing to do. I don't want to foreclose that, but I just want to say history does matter. It's not looking forward to, I know you want to say something, Henry. I'm sure you're going to get a lot of opportunities to say whatever you want.
Go ahead,
History does matter with respect to how we treat this. And I fear that questions raised by the mayor in terms of how we deal with emergency lanes in the future, how we deal with how we're going to solve this dilemma with roads all over the city, whether we're going to petition to have it made a public way or all of those. I fear that that kind of precedent is going to interfere with that process. Again, let me emphasize that I am sympathetic to the concerns that Councilor Lippman, Councilor Hosmer, Councilor Cheney have asserted with respect to Boathouse Road. I'm sympathetic to that. And I'm sympathetic to those folks who have been living on Boathouse Road and the need for emergency services. I'm sympathetic to all of that. I think history does matter. I'll be done in 2 seconds, I promise. 1001. History does matter, and we should consider that history in terms of future precedents and how we're going to deal with this entire dilemma, which we're going to face over and over again. Are we going to declare it an emergency way? Are we going to declare it a road? Are we going to do it by petition? How are we going to do it for each of the roads that we're dealing with? And those are questions that we're going to answer a year down the road, 2 years down the road, 6 months down the road. We're going to be facing those issues with all of the roads that come before us in terms of our consideration. So those are my concerns.
2 seconds are up.
I was going to say, that was a long...
They were up a while ago.
That was a long 2 seconds.
I had to say that because Henry so wants to take
All right, Councilor Lippman.
Councilor Hamel wants to speak. I'll let him go.
Oh,
I was just going to say to Dave that didn't we last meeting vote to accept like 40 roads or so as is?
We voted to move forward with that concept. We have not done that officially yet, but yes,
We haven't done that with any of the roads.
A lion's share of the roads we think we can do with the as-is
But those
acceptance.
were roads that are going to be considered public roads.
Absolutely.
This will
33
continue to
of
be
them.
considered a
33.
private road.
Yeah.
These two. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Wes, how many, can I ask Wes a question? How many private roads, other than what we're discussing tonight, do we have?
Can't tell you the actual number of roads. I can tell you the 17 miles of private roads that are truly private in the city. That counts everything from Briarcrest type to Southdown, Long Bay, Wildwood. Those are just examples of them. There's many others out there.
What does that do to those roads?
Again, it really at that point depends upon what the city council decides to do and what reasons they decide to do it for. If it's truly for, the fire truck to go down there to pump off of at the end of Boathouse Road, that's a valid excuse. If you're doing it for fairness underneath the city, underneath the state, it's not. Because it has to be for something better than the betterment of the abutters. It has to be for the city as a whole.
So the roads that, I believe we've already discontinued services on some of the private roads, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
We did 6.
Does that jeopardize that?
If you use that, saying what the discussion was about fairness, then yes, we would have to bring those roads back in and start servicing them again.
You made my point, Wes. I mean, that's the essential issue here. History's got nothing to do with it. It's got to do with the circumstances that we're trying to address, and it's not a fairness issue. It's about a going forward issue, which is it in the best interest of the safety of the city as a whole to be able to pump water out of the lake when we need to? Yes. Simple. Done. Let's vote on it. Let's go.
Any other discussion? Mr. Myers?
Just one procedural point. If you do approve this tonight, we're still required to go through a public hearing process. So your approval tonight will trigger us advertising a public hearing and going through that process as we would for any emergency lane declaration.
Anyone else? We ready to vote? All right, we're ready to vote on the main motion to designate Pendleton Beach Road and Boathouse Road as emergency lanes with a limited scope to include only winter maintenance. Councilor Lippman?
With the context that it's for specific purposes we've talked about. Yeah.
Right, that's not in the motion itself, but we have that on record in the minutes.
And I guess I'll add, because I'm going to vote for this motion, with my own concerns about the propriety of considering Boathouse Road at this time and those concerns, because I'm going to vote for this motion. I'm not going to oppose it.
I'm sorry, you lost me. What?
Okay, I just want to state that I had concerns about it. I'm going to vote for this motion. I'm standing on my concerns. I don't know what's going to happen in public hearings. I don't know what's going to happen in the future with respect to future considerations of roads. So I just want to make it plain that while I'm voting for this motion, I hate being 5-1. It happens all the time, but I'm going to vote for this motion with those reservations.
We will make sure the minutes reflect both points accurately, and please review
And
them
if they
once
don't,
the
it will
clerk
be,
submits them.
and if they don't, there'll be your responsibility to get with the clerk and make sure that it says what you want it to say. Okay, it's like the congressional record. You can
I know.
change it
I
afterwards
know.
to what you meant to say.
I know. This all gets too complicated sometimes.
All right, we ready to vote? All those in favor of the motion, please raise a hand. 6 votes in motion, 6 votes in favor. The motion carries unanimously. Thank you. All right, the next 2 items under new business are collective bargaining agreement related, and I will quickly state the information that I do prior to any motion to approve a collective bargaining agreement, and that is to remind the council and our audience that labor law, New Hampshire labor law, precludes what we can say. We have 2 collective bargaining agreements before us tonight to either approve or disapprove, which have been agreed to on behalf of the city by Mr. Myers, and he's bringing them to us for our approval. We are not allowed to discuss or even mention the general terms that are included in this contract, but everyone should know that we have been briefed in private, which we're allowed to be, as to what those terms are. So we're not approving or disapproving this blindly. We have the information, we're just not allowed to discuss it. If the motions carry, both or either one of them, I will call on Mr. Myers to publicly reveal the high points, if you will, of those collective bargaining agreements. But I will remind the councilors that we are not allowed to discuss details of those contracts in public at this point in time. All right, so first up, item 20D is a tentative agreement with the Laconia Professional Firefighters Association. A motion would be in order that the City Council approve the tentative agreement for the Laconia Professional Firefighters Association for the period from July 1, 2018 through June 30, 2021, a term of 3 years. Councilor Haynes makes that motion, seconded by Councilor Lippman. Any discussion? All those in favor, please raise a hand. 6 votes in the affirmative, that motion carries unanimously. And let's get to the next one, and then I'll recognize the city manager. So then the next one is a tentative agreement with the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. So a motion would be in order that the City Council approve the tentative agreement for the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees for the period from July 1, 2018 through June 30, 2021, again, a 3-year collective bargaining agreement. Someone care to make that motion? Counselor Bounds makes that motion. Counselor Lippman seconds it. Any discussion? All those in favor, please raise a hand. 6 votes in the affirmative, that motion carries as well. So I will call on the city manager to briefly tell the public what's in those 2 contracts.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I'll bring these up in the order in which you approved them. So the first one would be the firefighters contract, a couple of very minor housekeeping changes in language that have no material impact. The COLAs are identical to what's been approved with other collective bargaining agreements to date, and also with the compensation and classification plan for the city's non-union employees. So it's a 2.1% COLA based on last year's CPI, Consumer Price Index, figure that was used with the city's budget for the tax cap purposes. So that's 2.1% that was effective as of July 1. The COLAs for years 2 and 3, so the following July 1 or closely thereto, whenever the pay week starts, will be the actual CPI for the prior calendar year. Again, what we use for the tax cap calculation. It'll be the number, as long as the number falls within a range of 1% to 2.5%. Those are the minimum and maximum amounts. So if the number were coming higher, we'd use 2.5. If the inflation number came in at less than 1%, we'd be using the 1%. The changes to health insurance were identical to the other approvals you've given. So we've added a new health insurance plan, which has a little less expense. The employee's cost share stays at 10% on that. Employees can stay with the current plan. They'd be contributing 14% in year 1 and 15% in years 2 and 3. We've also included here the new buyout language so that those who opt out of city insurance and show insurability elsewhere, we've increased that payout beyond just 50% of the city's avoided cost of the specific single plan to also incentivize folks who might be on a 2-person or a family plan. Those buyout numbers for the 2-person are around 8,000 this year, and on the family plan around 10,000, providing some significant income to employees who opt out, but also some significant savings to the city. There is only one other new item in there. It's a weekly stipend, a flat dollar amount stipend that is paid to all firefighters who have firefighter 1 and 2 certification or their equivalent. This contract, while it will have an effective date of July 1 this year, for all intents and purposes, goes into effect with what really is a beginning pay period late in October. And for the firefighter group, I think it might be October 28th or 29th, and the other group it's one day later because of when the work week starts. But that'll be the effective date for the COLAs going into place. That'll be the effective date for the insurance plan of either them staying on the current plan or choosing the new plan and having those cost share amounts come out of their paycheck. There is, even though we're applying it assuming a July 1st acceptance date, so there's no gaps in the terms of when we have collective bargaining agreements in place. There is nothing that's retroactive with this agreement, so we are not paying back COLAs. We are not paying back steps for those folks who are not. We will be placing any firefighter who has missed a step on the step they should be come that November 1st, give or take a day date. But again, nothing retroactive, and anything that's in this contract that was new, that was to be prorated, will be prorated if it was some kind of a lump sum payment. So it'll be proportional to being several months into the contract. So that's the firefighters. I want to say ditto for a lot of what I just said on the AFSCME contract. Health insurance, the same as we've done for the folks. The COLAs, the same, the increase to the buyouts. And again, we will place people on steps who have missed a step, but nothing retroactive. And we will be prorating any lump sums that are new in the contract based on where they are. A couple of different items in the AFSCME contract. We do have 2 mechanics in this union. We have created a new grade position. They are in a grade 45, and they're going up 1 grade to a 46 to put the mechanics in there. That equates to about a 5% increase in wages they're earning now to what they will be earning, and gives them an opportunity to earn a couple of new steps. We want to remain competitive in the market for those types of skills and make sure that we've got quality people on staff who can maintain our vehicles. We also gave some upward mobility options to folks who are in a grade 43, which is determined as light equipment operator, to move up to a grade 44, which is a heavy equipment operator. They'll have to hit extra incentives in educational type of classes they attend, and they're also required to do a mentoring project either with the employees here in the city or something within the community. Potentially could be students at the high school and the college on their own, and that's a project that's approved through what's called the Road Scholar Program, ROADS Scholar for Road Pavement Management, and that type of project is overseen by one of the advisors in the UNH cooperative
We're
that
all
deals
here
with this
the other
program.
kind.
I'm sure we are. Just wanted to, that was a kickoff for the spelling bee that's coming up too. I wanted to make sure we differentiate there. And for anybody who's at a top step who is not taking advantage of moving to an additional pay grade for the reasons I just outlined, there's a flat $500 stipend for anybody at top step. I should have gone over the cost for the fire as well. I'll give you the cost summary for AFSCME, and I'll go back to the fire. But I believe there's either 16 or 17 folks in this union, inclusive of steps, cost of living adjustments, any of the stipends I mentioned, the city's contribution for retirement system cost and increased FICA and Medicare costs, offset by some of the health insurance savings and more potentially to be realized if additional folks opt out of city insurance due to the increased buyouts. The cost for the AFSCME contract is a little over $30,000, again, for 16 or 17 members in that group. The firefighters have 36 members in, and again, for the same thing, steps, cost of living adjustments, the stipend for having the firefighter 1 and 2 certification, increase in retirement system, and only Medicare cost, offset by some health insurance savings, and again, the potential, now they have the options for more. The cost of the first year of the contract for fire is about $101,000 for 36 folks in that group.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to item 20F. It's on page 34 of your packet. This is the introduction of ordinance 2018-189-20-01 and an ordinance amending chapter 18920 building sewer permits, application fee, and to request to schedule a public hearing on October 22nd during the regular city council meeting to gather input prior to final adoption. Mr. Myers.
Okay, so this is a follow-up from what the council had given us consensus on at the last meeting on the sewer. We will continue to work numbers for you and come back with options for what the request was for the second and third year and look at debt financing portions and provide some scenarios for you. But this would be simply to move this to a public hearing in 2 weeks and take action on it that evening as well.
Any questions or comments? Councilor Lippman.
Move the question.
All right, Councilor Lippman, we have 3 motions to approve here. Councilor Lippman moves to waive a reading of this ordinance, which is ordinance number 189-20-01, which is on page 35, and to read the ordinance by title only. Is there a second to that motion? Councilor Hosmer seconds that motion. Any discussion? All those in favor of waiving reading? 6 votes in affirmative, that motion carries. Next up, motion to be in order to move the first reading of the ordinance 189-20-01 and ordinance amending chapter 189 building sewer permits application fee. Councilor Lippman, do you want to make that motion also?
Well, yes.
Seconded by Councilor Haynes. Any discussion? All those in favor, please raise a hand. 6 votes in affirmative, that motion carries. And finally, the public hearing. Councilor Lippman also moves to schedule a public hearing on October 22nd, 2018 during the regular city council meeting to gather input prior to final adoption of the ordinance. Is there a second to that motion, please? Councilor Hosmer. Thank you. Any discussion? All those in favor of scheduling a public hearing, please raise a hand. 6 votes in the affirmative, that motion carries. Thank you. All right, we're on to 20G, which is introduction of ordinance 189-50-01, an ordinance amending chapter 189-50 sewer charges, and to request a schedule of public hearing on October 22nd during the regular council meeting to gather input prior to final adoption. Mr. Myers.
So while the first ordinance that you just referred to, Mr. Mayor, was for the sewer hookups, these are for the flat rate fees based on consumption. For the majority of people in the city on public sewer, it's tied into usage in your water bill. We do have a small amount of what we call sewer-only users, which are a flat rate fee going into it. So this is amending the charges for both of those types of billing process. And again, we will bring you the information regarding what we had proposed for year 2 and year 3 at a later date.
Questions or comments? Okay, again, we have 3 motions to consider here. First up would be a motion to waive reading of this ordinance in its entirety and to read by title only. Councilor Hosmer makes that motion. Councilor Lippman seconds it. Any discussion? All those in favor of waiving the reading, please raise a hand. 6 votes in the affirmative, that motion carries. Next up, Councilor Hosmer moves a first reading of ordinance 2018-189-50-01, an ordinance amending chapter 189-50 sewer charges. Second to that motion, please. Councilor Lippman seconds the motion. Any discussion? All those in favor, please raise a hand. We have 6 votes in the affirmative. That motion also carries. And finally, Councilor Hosmer moves to schedule a public hearing on October 22nd, 2018 during the regular city council meeting to gather input prior to final adoption of the ordinance. That motion is made by Councilor Bounds, seconded by Councilor Haynes. Any discussion? All those in favor, please raise a hand. 6 votes in the affirmative. That motion carries as well. And the last item of new business tonight is city manager contract extension. You have a memorandum on page 40 of your packet and a copy of the employment agreement the city manager has on page 41. And as I understand this contract, according to the terms of it, needs to be extended at the end of each contract year so that there's always a full year's contract in place in the event the manager or council decide not to renew the agreement. At this time, the council should consider extending the city manager's employment agreement until June 30, 2020. So we're a little late getting to this. Is that?
Usually it says to be done by September 15th, so we're only a couple of weeks behind it.
Okay. Any discussion of what we're getting into here? So we're just pushing the expiration date out 1 full year because both parties have to give a year's notice, correct?
There's other things, but the way it was originally set up, my contract was for 3 years on the initial term, and it said when there's down to 1 year remaining, the council should take action. And that way, if people are looking to go a different direction, everyone's got notice and we can have an orderly separation.
Councilor Lippman?
I move to propose motion.
All right, Councilor Lippman moves to extend the contract to City Manager Scott Myers as outlined in Section 2 of his employment agreement until June 30, 2020. Seconded by Councilor Hamel. Any discussion?
Can we have the staff recommendation?
I heard it was ambiguous.
It was lukewarm.
It was a lukewarm endorsement. All right. All those in favor, please raise a hand. 6 votes in the affirmative, that motion carries as well. Thank you. All right, we have 1 item of unfinished business to get to tonight. The only other scheduled piece of business, and that is with regard to our discussion of short-term rentals that we had 2 meetings ago, I think, when we had residents of the North Main Street area come to council concerned about one particular house there that was being advertised on Airbnb for sleeping up to 22 people and being rented out as a, quote, party house right here in River City. So what we have a memorandum in front of us written by our attorneys that is privileged to the council only at this point in time.
Correct. They're covered by attorney-client privilege, but in our discussion with legal counsel, we see no reason why collectively as a body, if you agree to waive the privilege and discuss it and make this a public document, we have no objection to that in this particular case.
So the one thing that I want to call everyone's attention to in this area seems a no-brainer to me is that if you have the table of permitted uses in our current zoning ordinance, which I apologize, I did not have with me the night that we discussed this 2 meetings ago, but I went and looked at it the next morning and immediately noted that under residential special service uses, boarding, rooming, or lodging houses are specifically prohibited in the RS zone. And the property in question is in the RS zone. So it seemed to me obvious that what we were discussing that night is already prohibited.
I don't disagree.
So if that were the case, then it would be, now, this whole other so that, to me, that is cut and dried. As of whether it's right or wrong, it's pretty cut and dried in the ordinance now that you can't do it. And that's my opinion. And secondly, I was very interested in the memorandum from the attorney with regard to discretionary or discretion in terms of enforcement and the different ways that that was described and viewed were somewhat surprising to me, I guess. But anyway, I'd be interested in what you all's comment on that end of it especially is to so-called discretionary enforcement.
I want to first just move to waive the privilege so we can make this document public. I want to do that first.
All right, Counselor Bounds waives council's privilege to discuss a memorandum from Mitchell Group, Municipal Group Professional Association to the City Council dated on this subject dated September 29, 2018. Seconded by Counselor, what's your name again? Cheney. Thank you.
Wait,
Any discussion?
I just looked to Mr. Myers as to any reason why we shouldn't.
No, we discussed this with legal counsel. I mean, there may be some things going forward that we want to control a little bit more in some options and that may be available to us, but for this particular document, I have no concerns about you waiving that privilege and releasing it.
All right, all those in favor of waiving privilege, please raise a hand. 6 votes in the affirmative, that privilege is waived. All right, so who wants to start? No one? Councilor Lippman.
So, I mean, I guess the enforcement of something is to first to bring it to someone's attention that they may be something that they don't know, right? That's, I think, a starting point, right? I mean, that's just seems to be the appropriate thing to do if there's not an immediate danger to other individuals. And I think at this point, we have the table to go by and we notify. Then I think after that, it becomes one of enforcement. I don't know if we need to make it more complicated than that.
and if I may, as I understood counsel, enforcement can be based on complaint rather than us going out and searching Airbnb and all that sort of stuff. And I don't know what the appropriate way to address that is, but I would suggest that we include that in our deliberations, that we look forward to enforcement being a result of complaints rather than spending the time to go out and search for them. If they're not causing a hardship, I'm fine with that.
Councilor Haynes.
I understand why we had the discussion, but I go back to the original comments that I made at prior meetings. It was a matter of enforcement. If it's there, it's there, and I apologize to the people of North Main Street that had to go through that, and we should have just enforced it right from the beginning.
Anyone else? So I guess my question on the enforcement issue is, what is meant by acting only on complaints? So does that mean that, I'm assuming that that means nothing happens until there is a complaint. So then the question becomes, if one neighbor complains, and obviously when you got an enforcement issue for the code enforcement officer or whatnot, that's, you know, that, those all don't come to city council to say, are we gonna send a letter to you know, XYZ saying cease and desist this activity or whatever, but I'm just curious, I'm just wondering what selective enforcement means in terms of, or what we want it to mean in terms of does it take 5 neighbors to complain? Does it take 1? Is 1 complaint, and then we look it up and find, yeah, it's advertised on Airbnb, and so therefore they can't do it anymore, period.
I'm sorry, Henry, I don't believe it has anything to do with Airbnb. That's just tangential to the problem.
Right.
It's a question of, you know, if for any reason we become aware that someone is by complaint become aware that someone is in violation, code enforcement should take action.
Okay.
Period.
That's the key question I'm asking. So we're not, I want to clarify, unless someone disagrees, that we're not saying we're going to selectively enforce it in terms of you get to do it, but I don't.
No.
We don't mean that.
Nope.
We mean simply, we're not going hunting for them, but if a neighbor complains, they have to stop.
That's,
Is that what you?
that's where I,
There'll be an investigation.
yes.
There'll be a determination as to whether there's a violation. If there's a determination that there's a violation, then the appropriate steps will be taken by code enforcement in terms of, I think there's initial warning, letter to the party. We'll follow the traditional steps with respect to notice and due process and all of those issues, and move forward through each complaint. So, you know, certainly I'm not considering directing code enforcement to go out looking for violations. That's not what I would look for.
I was just looking for clarification on what selective enforcement means.
Fair enough.
Counselor Lippman, I'm sorry.
So I don't, I agree with everything that's been said, but I would caveat it with the following, which is if we don't need a complaint to take an action, if we become aware of it on our own for some reason, like for example, if the police go by and see something that doesn't look right, I don't want it to have to wait on the neighbor to make that complaint.
Receiving a complaint, neighbor or police or whoever.
Or even a member of the city council.
Or even a member, yes.
It can be.
As horrifying as that is.
As horrifying as that may be. But I don't envision this as a private party making a complaint, and that's the only time we'll do anything. If someone sees a problem, code enforcement sees a problem, law enforcement sees a problem, then we'll proceed to follow the usual route with respect to enforcement of our ordinances. Everybody agrees with that?
So the procedure would be someone complains, be it an officer or a neighbor or whatever. Dean's department looks it up and sees what zone that property is in and determines whether or not it's permitted use or not. The only one in the residential areas where it is permitted is SFR. There are 2 other residential zones where it's permitted by special exception, and if they don't have a special exception, then they'd be told they have to get one. And in the other 3 residential areas, it's just strictly prohibited. So they would just enforce that ordinance and act accordingly.
And while we're mentioning it as being an Airbnb, that's just a platform. There's multiple platforms, but it could also be the old traditional way before we had the internet and somebody gave a listing to a realtor. Or, I mean, we're talking about any short-term rental within the residential district. You know, could be someone who's vacations away a month every summer and they rent their house for a month every summer, and it's not the party house and it's not the whatever, but that's a short-term rental within a residential district, which is not allowed. So I'm just sharing with you that we will take your direction and only seek out those that we either identify or are brought to our attention. But it does broaden the scope is not just an Airbnb or
Yeah,
a
yeah. I-
vacation by rental. It
We
could
all
be.
agree that.
I don't think it broadens the scope. I think it just applies the
Right,
ordinance.
but somebody who could not be renting the party house and just has a family of mom and dad and 2 kids coming in and renting the house for the weekend are no problems. You could have somebody in the neighborhood saying, oh, they're renting the property, and we would have to address that the same as somebody who was advertising it.
Well, I don't think there's any avoiding that. I mean, we may be able to amend the ordinance or something in terms of,
And again, I think we are going to be looking for we wanted to bring you to this to say, here's what we think we are, here's a sample of a violation letter that can go out. We're still going to work with legal counsel and see what other options we can do, and maybe there's some amendments to the zoning that we can bring forward and have conversations about going forward. There could be some stuff legislatively that happens over the next, so we're not just done with it tonight, but this is an answer, this is a first step, we've got some direction, and we will continue to bring you options for your consideration.
okay.
I don't think you need a motion from us, do you?
I think we've got the direction
Simply,
we need.
if that's what the ordinance says, enforce it. All right, anyone else have anything to add to that? Council comments? Council comments tonight? None? All right, so I don't believe we have a need for a non-public tonight, do we? All right, so in lieu of any other business, I will declare this meeting adjourned at 9:10 PM.
By the way, I didn't really make you, and I said I hate 5